Hey everybody, and welcome to my Roaring Knight candidate tier list video. I'm pretty late to the party on this one, probably should have done this sooner, but I figured since we're all waiting around and trying to kill time until chapters 3 and 4 come out, I might as well do this. I've not really talked about my thoughts on who the knight is. As far as I'm aware, I don't think I've mentioned it in any of my videos, but I thought that this would be a great opportunity to kind of go through and share all my thoughts on the different potential knight candidates. I didn't make this tier list I mean. There's a couple people on here I probably wouldn't have included if I were making my own. I guess we'll get to them when we get there. But I went with this one anyways because it includes a lot of different options and I didn't want anybody to feel like I was excluding anything. So while this is probably too wide, I just thought it was great to kind of cover all the bases. Alright, so before we dive right in here, I want to start off by covering how I'm going to be approaching this. I'm going to go through each of the candidates one by one. I'll start by giving my own personal feelings on the candidate, and then I'll try to rank them as objective as I possibly can. I think that'll make it a little more interesting than if I just rank them based on how much I like each candidate, because it actually gives all of them a fair shot. Also, I know that there probably are going to be people who disagree with how objective I actually am if I rank a candidate they like really low, so if you disagree with how I ranked a candidate, let me know. Let me know your reasons why. If you want to debate or discuss it in the comments, I'm really open to that. I'll do my best to respond, and if I end up changing my mind, I'm not going to make a whole new video, but I'll pin a comment or something. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the candidates, starting off with Alphus. Now, this is an interesting one to kind of start with, because I've never actually given Alphus Knight a lot of thought. I've never really seen a lot of people discussing Alphus Knight as a theory or as a candidate. I've heard it pop up once or twice, but never really that seriously. It was kind of tossed around as a, oh, wouldn't this be kind of interesting? Sort of thing. At least that's how I encountered it. So I'd never really actually seriously considered it and taken time to think about it. But as I've thought it over a little bit and as I'm thinking through it right now, it is kind of interesting. I don't really think it's true, but it's kind of interesting because there's not really a lot standing in the way and it has some good things going for it. So first of all, there's nothing preventing Alphus from being the knight. As far as we know, there's no hard facts that would stop that from happening. Thinking about it, Alphus actually has a lot of potential opportunity to be the knight. I think for me at least, one of the big things that gets in the way is motive. You could definitely do some things. Some of the ideas I've heard talked about is the ideas of escapism, because that's a really big theme in Deltarune, and Alphus definitely leans into that with her love of anime and superhero comics. So there's definitely potential for the character there, but I also really struggle to see how her narrative ties into the existing narratives of the characters. I don't really see a dynamic between her and the main characters, Chris, Suzy, Ralsei, Noel. There is something to go off of, but it doesn't really feel like enough to be, main villain material. The relationship between the characters doesn't feel that strongly built upon, because Alphus is the new teacher, right? She hasn't been there for very long, so there's not as strong a tie. Some of these other characters are going to have much stronger ties, and Alphus doesn't really have that to pull on. Now, getting more into the objective side of things, I do actually feel like that narrative issue is something objective. As of right now, there's not that strong of a connection between the characters. And I feel like that is just a fact that does hamper this theory a bit. I think what it has going for it is the fact that she could tie into escapism, and also the fact that she has access to the classroom and very likely access to the library as well. So she absolutely has the sufficient means to be the knight. Of course, she has the main problem that I think every single candidate has, which is the issue of motive. We're not really sure what the knight's motive is. I personally, based on just a number of different factors, believe that the knight does deliberately want to cause the roaring, and I can't really see that for Alphus. Of course, we only have such a small portion of the game. It definitely could change, and I believe that will change in chapters 3 and 4, but for right now, there's not that sufficient driving factor to want to end the world. Alphus doesn't seem nearly that depressed or insane to want to do that. Also, on top of that, there's just not really a lot to work with. That might seem kind of unfair because that's the case for pretty much every candidate, but Alphys does have strong nothing burger energy, unfortunately. I'm really sorry to say. I think I'm gonna put her in B, maybe like a high C. There's interesting stuff going on. I can see why people might like Alphys as a candidate, but I don't feel like there's enough. I think I might bump her up to B, kind of a middle of the road sort of thing. I don't know if my tier list is gonna be laid out the way a lot of other people imagine tier lists, but considering how many candidates we have and what my thoughts on all of them are, I want to kind of spread them out a little bit more. So I think I'll put her in B. Nice middle of the road kind of candidate, but there's not really much to build on. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to bump her down to high C, just because of how it's just these kind of loose ideas that are really what carries the theory. Just because a character has access to certain things doesn't mean that they would do it. And like I said, the issue is motivation. There's no real driving force there. The next candidate is Alvin. Alvin is definitely a pretty fun one. So my personal thoughts are Alvin is a lot of fun because he's a new character. I definitely am biased towards newer characters. I feel like having Undertale characters again kind of does a disservice to all the new stuff being introduced in Deltarune. Not just new characters, but new themes as well. The newer characters play into the new themes better because they're built from the ground up to work with those themes. And while, like I mentioned with Alphys, these older characters can definitely fit into those themes, I feel like the newest characters take advantage of them a lot better. And speaking of which, Alvin has a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think a big reason why he's such an interesting character is because he's got stuff, but it's mysterious enough, and there's just enough detail left out that it really draws on and captures your imagination. Even if he's not the knight, I'm still really interested in what's going on with him, because a lot of the dialogue, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but him being near his father's grave, him being part of the church and talking about the angel, that definitely really draws on a lot of interesting kind of mysteries that are being set up. And what is this religion in the light world, and how does it connect to the angel, and what does the angel mean for the legend? He has a direct connection to it because he's one of the only characters that really talks about the angel. Something else that makes him interesting is he's the son of Gerson, and as far as we're aware, in Undertale, Gerson never had any children, so this is kind of sort of a branching reality, I suppose. I don't know if Deltarune is an alternate reality or an alternate timeline. That's a whole other mess to get into, but it definitely feels like a stark departure with also this strange connection back to the game. So yeah, I think he makes for a really good candidate. He might not actually be the knight, but I think he makes for a great candidate because he has some stuff there and it's enough to play on the mysteries. A lot of candidates just don't really have anything going for them aside from vague ideas and cool fanfic potential, but they need something solid to rest on, and Alvin has a pretty solid foundation for at least the mystery aspect. If you don't like Alvin Knight, I would hope you'd be able to read that dialogue and acknowledge that, yeah, there's some cool mystery going on. I would hope anyone can see the intrigue here. Objectively, we don't really know where his story is going. We know that his dad, Gerson, has connections to fiction with the book writing, and we also know Gerson was a teacher at the school, so the main argument is how far you can draw the connection from Gerson to Alvin. This does make it a lot harder to come to a definitive conclusion about Alvin, just based purely on how you kind of have to get some of the connections secondhand from Gerson, but at the same time, the narrative themes that are established really help to kind of carry him further. I will also say that there's kind of an upside that I waited until a trailer came out to do this, which is the Chapter 4 Dark World really looks church-themed, and we know Father Alvin has connections to the church. So that's something pretty recently that really roots in Alvin's favor. I think I'm going to put Alvin in A. I'm kind of debating on maybe bumping him down to B because, as I mentioned, he has evidence, but a lot of it kind of comes secondhand from Gerson. But even still, Gerson has the whole problem of being dead, so how much of an obstacle is that really? So I think Alvin fits decently well into A, at least largely due to the narrative themes that are being built up. I feel like it works really well here. So maybe I'll bump him down to B, but for now I think he works well in the A slot. Our next candidate that we have is Asgore, and I'm not really big on this theory for a number of reasons, main one being my bias against Undertale characters as the knight, but mainly because, as I mentioned with kind of the thematic and character being built up, he really doesn't seem like the knight at all. He's a divorced dad trying his best. You know, I don't really see much motivation to cause the roaring there. I don't see much motivation to cause the knight. A lot of people argue, you know, he's trying to get away from his troubles, escapism, but he's already kind of disconnected from his problems. He seems to deny his problems more than try to, like, you know, indulge in escapism. He kind of just keeps pretending everything's fine despite struggling. So him being the knight, at least based on my understanding of the character, doesn't really work out. Also, the plausibility is really low. And actually, on that note, we'll get to the more objective side of things. So, key points: he does not really have the means to access any of the areas we know the knight had to go to. He's divorced from Toriel, so his opportunity to get into the school is kind of shot dead there. He's kind of friends with Alphus, so maybe he could get access by stealing Alphus's keys or whatever, but that's kind of shot down. He has no reason to have access to the library. And yeah, key thing, he has no motivation and his themes don't really tie in. I guess he wants to be accepted, which does tie into Chris and Suzy and Ralsei. But that's about all he has going for him in terms of evidence. I'm going to slam dunk Asgore into the D category. Just because narratively and in terms of opportunity, there's nothing going for him. And I also personally don't feel like he's that interesting. So I know I said I was being objective, but I mean, like, come on, there's really nothing pointing towards him at all. And that in turn makes him less interesting. Next up is Azriel. No. Just no. That's my thought. He's at college. Unless he snuck away, and this is something we talked about in the Jaru video, unless Toriel has a complete shift of character and is just completely careless when it comes to Azriel and just doesn't care about him at all. I really doubt he stayed around in town, because he has to have stayed around in town for at least a couple days, if not longer. We have no idea when the Empty Town or Castle Town fountain was created. Could be years, could be days, we have no idea. So he's had to be back since at least that long. So there's really nothing going on here. Thematically, we don't know anything about him in Deltarune. We have no Deltarune counterpart. We have stuff from when he was a little kid, but he's in college now. We do get some kind of snippets of the type of person he is now, but it's very rare. It's very rare. And so trying to actually come to any conclusions about his character arc or his personality is really difficult because we have no relevant points. Like, yes, the Undertale characters bear a lot of similarity to their original counterparts, but there's still differences, and you need that comparison, and we just don't have that here. So again, diving into the more evidence-based critique, I hope I'm not being too dismissive here, but I think I kind of got into this with my opinions as well. There's not a lot of evidence, there's no means, no motive, no narrative ties. It would be cool because Azriel is Chris's brother. That would be a significant impact. But there's, I think, even less than Asgore. Because I said with Asgore, you could possibly tie him into escapism. That might be what's happening. But with Azriel, we just kind of have vague concepts. Like, sure, he could be into escapism to get away from the stress of college and being the town's golden boy, but that's purely speculation. There's no evidence to suggest that. Next up, we have Birdley, and I'm really excited. I'm going to need to create a new category right here and now. Hold on a sec. I'm going to add row below, and then close this, and I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to make it gray. And I'm just going to call this What? And yeah, Birdley's in the what category. You might find this to be dismissive. Maybe this is unfair, but like, this is something... With Azriel and Asgore, I feel like there's just enough ambiguity where it feels like it's possible. With Birdley, what? What are you talking about? Like, he doesn't know anything about Dark Worlds. He doesn't have any... Like, his motive gets established inside of a Dark World. You can't have somebody in a murder mystery, like murder someone else, and then get the motive for murdering them after they're already dead. What are you talking about? There's no reason for him to do this. Like, we know that he's had these insecurities before the Dark World and he was masking them up, but as far as we know, there's no real reason for him to do this. He doesn't seem to have any understanding of how making fountains work. This is just something that's truly baffling to me, and a couple other people are going to go here because I feel like a lot of these candidates aren't even worth considering. And I don't know, you might consider that unfair of me to put a bunch of these candidates down in essentially a trash bin, but I mean, come on. Do I even need to talk about how little sense this makes? How there's less than no evidence. There's ample counter evidence against Birdley. Next up is, gosh, I don't even remember her name. I'm putting her in what as well? Yeah, no, this might seem unfair, but she's big NPC energy. There's not a lot going on. She's essentially a gag with Patty. The two of them don't like each other, and they liked each other in Undertale. There's no motive. There's no apparent means. I guess we don't know that much about her, so there's like some ambiguity, but even then, it's just like, she's a gag character. She exists purely for a gag. There's no evidence to work with. It's just, you know, this gag and some backstory for Azriel. That's about all we get from her, so I'm putting her in the what category. Again, I hope people don't think this is too unfair, but like when you have such a nothing burger, and even like probably counter evidence, I'm going to say counter narrative evidence, just because her role seems pretty well defined and there's absolutely nothing to work with that could give her motivation for being the knight. I'm not taking that seriously. I'm sorry, I'm putting her in what? Patty's dad. Also in what? I'm actually going to rank Birdley lower real quick, just because he has counter evidence, but he's also going to be in what? Because what? Yeah, again, he's a character that kind of just exists for the background. There's no motivation, no means. There's nothing going for him. Why is he here? Why did you put him here? Why is he here? Next up is Caddy. I believe that Caddy and then Bratty, I believe. Caddy, I'm not going to put her in what? I'm not going to put her in what because unlike Birdley, there's still some ambiguity. She talks about dark wizard stuff. There might be reason for her. She definitely seems to be interested in magic, and so that kind of gives some reason, potential motivation to become the knight. In terms of means, she has pretty much next to nothing. I think this is kind of interesting. I think it has some potential. I know I said I would stick to a strict theme, but I keep kind of wrapping in the evidence with my opinions because the evidence does shape my opinions a lot. Yeah, not a lot to work with. I feel like the magic is what most people are going on when they pick her as a candidate. I'm going to put her bottom of D. There's some potential. There's more potential than anyone down here in what? But that kind of... The bar is in hell. The bar is very low. So she has something to work with, but not that much. Bratty or Caddy, I've gotten their names mixed up. I apologize. I'm sorry to all the Caddy and Bratty fans. I will never be forgiven. Also, she's going in what as well, because why? Why would she not be in what? Why was she even on this tier list in the first place? There is so much nothing. Everything I said for Gator Gal, whose name I forget, I'm really sorry, applies to her. I don't really need to repeat myself here. All right, the next candidate is December Holiday, and I'm really glad for this, finally getting back into some interesting candidates. I was a Death Knight believer for a very long time. I will fully admit that's my bias at the gate. I really like the idea of Death Knight. For a while, my theory was that Des was trapped in the Dark Worlds and trying to open fountains in order to find Noel. The 3 fountains we currently know of were opened in places around where Noel tends to be most frequently, that being the school and the library. So I found the idea of Des trying to find her sister to be pretty compelling. Unfortunately, as mentioned before, I came to realize the knight's motivation seems to be to cause the roaring, and that doesn't seem to fit with the little we know about Des. But enough about my old theories, I had to toss in the garbage. Let's get on to the facts. Des has a lot of interesting things going for her in terms of narrative. While there's not a lot to work with in terms of hard evidence, what we know for sure is that Des is definitely going to be important to the story. There's a lot going on in regards to the connections between the Holiday and Dreamer family, and there's a lot of mystery left to uncover there between Noel and Chris. And given that Noel also seems like she's going to be incredibly important to the plotline, Des would make for a really good candidate. Unfortunately, there's no real hard evidence. Des is kind of similar to Azriel in a sense that they are both away, although the context is very different. But what Des definitely has over Azriel is there is a lot more ambiguity surrounding her. This ambiguity does give her a lot of leverage over Azriel though, because with Azriel, there's a definitive location he's placed in, and it's unreasonable to expect him to be able to just walk away from that. Whereas with Des just being missing, it's a lot more plausible for her to come back to hometown somehow. I also mentioned her being trapped in the dark world, and that's a consensus that a lot of people seem to have, or at the very least, her being trapped somewhere. But this is where the ambiguity works in her favor again, because we don't really know any details of where or how she's trapped, so we don't know how plausible an escape from that place is. Also, this is more of a personal thing, but I still think it may be plausible that someone could open dark fountains from the other side, since Ralsei seems concerned about Birdley attempting to do it in Dark World, so given that, it might be possible. All this said, I'm gonna put December up above Alvin. I think that she deserves to be there because the narrative impact is a lot stronger given the connection to Chris and Noel, and I feel like that would have impacts on Suzy given her relationship to Chris and Noel. I think it would also do a lot to kind of tie together these plot points that have been set up. I feel like it would be a very narratively cohesive choice to have Des be the knight. Next, the man. Yeah, this is another what category. This is the man behind the tree. This seems really disconnected from anything knight related. It definitely leans more into the Gastra territory side of things. And Gastra and the knight seem to be very different in how they operate. The knight seems to be very directly influencing things, while Gastra seems to be a lot more subtle. I know some people may argue that Gastra is pretty direct because he speaks to the secret bosses, but Gastra is speaking to individuals who don't seem to have a lot of influence over the Dark World as a whole, whereas the Knight seems to have an influence that shakes everything up, going directly to the rulers of the Dark Worlds. Also, it's not clear how directly Gastra is talking to them. It could be a face-to-face conversation or just kind of these weird eldritch whispers. Anyways, I'm kind of off in the weeds here. The point is that the man behind the tree, there's really nothing to go off of whatsoever. I'll put him above Birdley because Birdley has strong counter evidence in my eyes, but there's no character here. There's nothing to work with. Everyman, I think that's a category. That's the same, but even worse, because Everyman isn't even a character. Everyman, it pops up in a bullet pattern for the amalgamates and in graffiti. That's it. I'm not even going to bother talking about this one too much. It's not even a character. And now we have Gastra. Okay, this might be controversial to some people, but I also, well, I kind of hinted at that with the man behind the tree. Gastra and the knight, to me, seem to have very distinct motivations from each other. Gastra seems to be very subtle, pulling the strings from a distance, whereas the knight is very in your face and up close and personal. Gastra also seems to be all about choice and freedom, and I don't know if that's what the knight is about. Again, we lack any real clarity for the knight's motivations. Some people say that Gastra is the story master trying to create the story, but given how Gastra wants you to create a character, is kind of focused on you and the player and choice, at least that's my understanding of the plot, it seems to be kind of counter to that idea. I also have a pretty hot take on Gastra, which is we understand so little about his personality. The vast majority of what we understand comes from assumptions, and those assumptions are pretty reasonable, but the fact that it's even possible to have a debate about how canon Gastra is, which, let me be clear, I think he is canon. I'm not trying to say Gastra isn't canon. It's just, you can't debate if Sans is canon. You see him in the game. Meanwhile, Gastra, there is ground for a debate. It's a weak argument, but you could make the argument. Basically, my point of saying that is there's so much about him that we just sort of assume from these vague details we've strung together. And so trying to define any strong motivation for Gastra is really a pointless task in my eyes, as of now. And I guess that puts him and the knight in a very similar spot. We don't really know what their motivations are. And so I guess in that ambiguity, you could make an argument for something. But I feel like given everything being set up in the opening sequence, and how the night seems to be operating, they seem to be contrary in their themes. Shifting over to the evidence, I don't know how Gastra would go about Hometown and open these things. I guess he could gamer god mode and just like enter commands and cheat the fountains in. But aside from that, we don't really know if he has the means. Also, another thing narratively is he talks to you during the game over screens in chapter 1, I believe. And that is also a thing that runs counter to the motivation. It's not super clear, but it doesn't give the vibes of someone who wants the world to be covered in darkness. It is clinical and detached, but still. Why would he give you the opportunity to restart at all if he was the knight? It's a weird thing. It's very weird. I'm gonna, I guess, put him maybe here in D, just above Caddy, because there's a lot of ambiguity that I guess you could get away with to make this stronger, but it just seems to me to be really weak. I feel like narratively there's not a lot of ground to stand on. Next up is Gerson. Immediate negative 7 billion because it's in a Jaru theory. I'm kidding. But yeah, I do have a bias against this because it is from the Jaruverse. This one has all the problems of Azriel, but a million times worse. While I think it goes against the narrative and the characters that have been established, Azriel could plausibly sneak home from college. Gerson is dead. He is in the earth. He is done. Some people take the Alvin dialogue, where it sounds like he's talking about the hammer and says, is it really right for it to ... That to me always reads as he's planning on doing something with the hammer, which wouldn't answer who the knight is because the fountains were open before that point, and it sounds like he's going to, in the future, do something. Also, Dustners, I don't find them cool. I find they're fanon, they're pure fanon. People have just kind of made up how determination works in this game and have decided that that's what happens. There's absolutely no evidence for it. People will say there's compelling evidence. I strongly disagree. It's just like, hey, remember Undertale? It's Undertale again. Which, yeah, that's my anti-Undertale bias shining through. I hate Undertale. I don't actually hate Undertale, but hopefully you get my point. I kind of think the main motivation for this is that people heard Gerson's cool backstory during the Monster War and want the super epic fight that we missed out on. But yeah, I just see absolutely nothing here. It's not that compelling. I really want to put it in what? I feel like people are going to get mad at me because this has somehow gotten popular, but there's no basis for it. There is no means. There is no motive. He is dead. People had to invent the concept of Dustners to try and pull him back from the grave to get this to work. I don't see it. As a favor, as a peace offering, I'll put it at the top of what? That's the best I can do for you. Next up, we can lightning round these two. Metaton is another what easily. I think I'm going to put Metaton down here just because we know we get like 3 lines of dialogue from him. Why? Like, I can see there was maybe a motive, but there's not much else past that. We have no info to go off of. Jockington, I'm actually going to put Jockington in this lightning round below Birdley because he doesn't have arms. Can't do it. Done. Yeah. No, I feel like people might be mad at me for skipping over Jockington, but he's mostly a gag character. And yeah, no real motive. The knight's long arm, maybe it's metaphorical, but I really don't care. Jockington is too goofy an answer, so bottom of what tier he goes. Next up, we have Chris Knight. Oh boy, do I have a lot of thoughts on Chris Knight. So, right off the bat, my full bias on display. I do not like this theory. I very strongly dislike this theory. A lot of that is not due to the theory itself. I will admit, again, putting all my bias on the table, a lot of that is due to the interactions I have had with the people who believe this theory. Let's just say they have not been very pleasant. They strawman, they misrepresent, they are incredibly disingenuous. I want to be clear, not all Chris Knight believers are like this, I hope. I actually haven't yet had a pleasant interaction with one. Mostly because after those bad interactions, I started avoiding it. So I'm sure there are plenty of great Chris Knight believers out there, but a large part of why I dislike this theory so strongly is because of those interactions I've had. Now, to show that I can go beyond my biases, I will say Chris Knight has the most solid evidence out of any Knight candidate. Definitively. It's no contest. If we're looking for the pure volume and the quality of the evidence, Chris Knight is where it's at. Unfortunately, this also brings with it a lot of counter evidence. So first of all, to preemptively get to the Chris Knighters that are going to be strawmanning me, I know some of them probably wrote me off when I said that I personally dislike this theory because of my interactions. They probably wrote me off then and there, saying stuff like, oh, see, you just hate Chris Knighters, so you're biased against it and you hate us and you don't listen to evidence. Those same people are probably going to be saying that I didn't go into all the evidence for it or that I ignored their debunks. I didn't. I have responses to them, but the thing about this video is I'm trying to be quick because if I gave my full thoughts on every single one of these, this video would be 70 hours long. So maybe I will make a full video about Chris Knight and some of the other candidates. Probably not, because we don't have that much time until the game launches. But believe me when I say I've heard a lot of the arguments and rebuttals and all that stuff. I have my responses. I'm just not putting them all here because I don't want to talk for 6 hours. So, for the evidence, Chris makes a fountain on screen. That is undeniable. That's pretty solid. Chris plausibly has access to the school because of Toriel, their mom, being a teacher. The library is a pretty far stretch for me, but for now, let's just say we can tap dance around that. Chris seems to be planning something. That's another big thing. Chris is a bit more clued in than we, the players, are, and that definitely is a big contributing factor to the narrative pull towards Chris Knight. This kind of gets into the problems, though. First of all, motivation. I cannot understand why Chris would do this. Chris is an edgy teen. It doesn't seem like Chris would be willing to end the world, and like I said, based on my reading of the evidence, that's something the Knight has to be willing to do. We could get that later, but I don't see it. Another big thing, like I mentioned, is the counter evidence. There are two major things that I think really go against this. One of them is the game over screen. If Chris dies, the roaring happens. Based on what we've been told, the sky has to fill with fountains. 2 fountains ain't gonna cut it. Now, some people have argued that maybe if 2 fountains are open long enough, but we have no idea how long the Castletown fountain has been opened, and it may have been open for a really long time and no roaring so far, so I feel like that's a decent enough argument there. And that actually ties directly into another issue that I have with it, which is the only way Chris Knight works is that Ralsei has to be lying. It can't be Ralsei just leaving out some details. The only way it works is for Ralsei to lie. I know we make a lot of jokes about Ralsei being sus, but me personally, I need sufficient reason to believe a character is lying, and as of yet, I haven't seen that for Ralsei. So I have a lot of difficulty getting behind that idea. So I think that's a pretty decent overview of some of the strongest points and counterpoints. I know, again, I feel like I'm going to get a lot of people complaining at this one. I'm going over it pretty quickly, and I'm going to put it in B. That might be harsh for some people. They might think it's my bias getting in the way, but like I said, strong counter evidence brings it down. I'm being incredibly generous by putting it in B in the first place, because I think that counter evidence should drag it down to D tier, honestly. But I'm trying not to let my bias influence me too much, and like I said, Chris Knight has the most sturdy evidence out of every candidate, so I think that earns them at least a B in this regard. Next up, we got Mad Mew Mew, who is being slam dunked here. I already gave my reasons when I talked about Mettaton. That's it, that's the end. Mayor Holiday. Okay, yeah, this is another one that is really interesting. Another very vague character that we don't know too much about. My thoughts on Mayor Holiday are very similar to my thoughts on Des. I think that narratively she's one of the most compelling possible characters, given her relationship with Chris and Noel. This is expanded a little bit more since we know she definitively has a connection to Asgore and how he lost his job. Some people theorize that because Asgore couldn't find Des, that's why he lost his job, which would connect Des to Asgore as well, but that's not really confirmed. Technically, the mayor firing Asgore isn't fully confirmed either, but it has a very solid foundation to it. I do really like this theory. I feel like the reveal of Mayor Holiday is going to be a pretty big deal. Even if she's not the Knight, I feel like that's a pretty big moment, given all the setup, especially with Queen. Check out the Universal Mother theory, shilling for my friend once again, shill, shill, shill. I actually do know some people who argue that because Noel confronted Queen, that kind of means that arc of her character is over. But I feel like that's only the setup. That's Noel developing the courage. That's like a practice run. That's not the real thing. She's not actually stood up to her mother yet. There's definitely still a lot of room for a compelling story between Noel and her mother, and I feel like that is going to be a key part of the story going forward. That being said, get into the evidence. Means It's pretty difficult for the mayor to be running around opening fountains when she's busy being the mayor and all that. Is it impossible? No. Her status as mayor would give her a lot of opportunities that many other candidates can't get, but it does start to stretch credulity pretty far. This also ties into the motive thing. There's a very strong case against her being the knight because of this. I feel like narrative carries her pretty far here as well, which is what has bumped up a lot of the other knight candidates. But I feel like it doesn't get her as far. I really wish it did. I really want to know more about her character, and I feel like it would be incredibly compelling. But all that said, I think I'm going to have to put her below Chris Knight here, just because, again, there's a lot of vagueness surrounding her character that I feel works against her instead of for her, like it does with Des. But I can definitely see her tying into the themes. It also seems like she could be pretty controlling, which I think would work well as a counter to the being able to make your own choices and freedom motifs that we have going on throughout the story. But yeah, I think that this is a pretty good spot here. Next up is Miss Boom. I'm also putting her in what? I'll put her here because I think we only ever get one line of dialogue ever mentioning her, and yeah, no, there's nothing to work with. I don't even know who she is as a character. Means she could get to the library. She has connections to her father, kind of like Alvin did, so maybe she could get into the school. But again, we don't know anything about her. We don't even know who she is in relation to Alvin. Like, there's nothing to go off of here. It's such a nothing burger character. Another what character we can get out of the way, Naps the Blook. I'm putting him down here. I know I'm slam dunking a lot of these, but I mean, come on. Like, I hope most people will agree with me about these characters down here and what. Like, seriously, what are they even doing on this list? I don't even want to say anything about him because I feel like I'm already wasting time going on as long as I am. Alright, who's next? We got Noel, and that's going to be another in the trash bin. I'm going to put her above Birdley, because I like Noel more than I like Birdley. I like Birdley a lot, but I like Noel more. But it's the same thing with Birdley here. Noel gets her motivation to create the Dark Fountain after Chapter 2. The Knight opened fountains before Chapter 2, so what are we doing here? And then we get to Papyrus. Oh boy, okay. I have thoughts about Papyrus. You might be able to tell from how I'm talking about this. I want so badly to throw Papyrus into the what tier, but I know I'm gonna get a whole bunch of people who believe Papyrus Knights whining and complaining if I do that. But yeah, there's absolutely nothing here. We don't even know anything about the Deltarune version of Papyrus. Sans doesn't even really talk about him, like, personality-wise. He just kind of vaguely alludes to him. And so much of the Papyrus Knight evidence is just stuff like looking at the newsletters and reading way too far into his appearances there. Newsflash, guys, they're the Deltarune and Undertale newsletters. They're for both games, so it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be in Deltarune. Also, Papyrus is just a really popular character, so it makes sense for Toby to draw a lot of attention to him in the newsletters. But anyways, I'm kind of getting off topic. In terms of the actual evidence, there's the level of ambiguity that Azriel has, which kind of gives some room for him to do stuff, so there's nothing directly disproving it. Aside from that, though, there's absolutely nothing in favor of it. And I don't find the narrative evidence to be that compelling. I know Papyrus fans are going to crucify me for saying this, but he really doesn't fit that well into the narrative unless you take some really big leaps. Papyrus Knight is built entirely on incredibly loose character comparisons where you just find one tiny detail that Papyrus has in common with one of the main characters of Deltarune, and you just run with it for miles. I'm going to be super generous here, and I'll put Papyrus at the bottom of D tier. That's as good as you're going to get from me. I really don't see any convincing evidence whatsoever, narrative or otherwise. Just a super weak theory in my eyes, and I have no idea how it's gotten as popular as it is. Next up is Burger Pants. I guess, like, up here, I don't know. I don't really see any motivation for him. I don't see any means. Very what tier theory. Same with QC. Actually, you know, we can go ahead and do that. QC's kind of cool, so I'll put QC up here because that's neat, I guess. That's about it, though. Not much else to say. Now, Rudy. Now, I feel like I've shown a lot of bias. I mean, I did put Noel in what, but I think I'm also going to have to put Rudy in what. He's been really sick for a while, and it seems like he's not faking. There's no real evidence to indicate that he's faking it. That makes it pretty hard for him to go out and create the Chapter 2 fountain at the very least. If you want to, we don't know exactly how long the Chapter 1 fountains have existed, as said before, so you could stretch that timeline out maybe a little bit, but even then, the Chapter 2 fountain solidly couldn't have been made by him. I don't know, maybe there are some diehard Rudy Knight fans out there that'll disagree with me and might have some evidence for this, but I consider that a hard counter to this theory, which is why he goes in what? Sans, hey, I heard you like Papyrus Knight. What if we had Papyrus Knight, but worse? Yeah, Sans is pretty far down there in the what category. Yeah, like I said, it's kind of all the problems of Papyrus Knight, but worse. He doesn't really have any discernible motivation from what I can pick up. He doesn't have any means. He only moved in just recently. It seems to be a little bit further in the past than we might expect based on how he frames it, considering he already knows Toriel. But even still, it seems weird for him to move in and to already have access to the school. Aside from that, I don't know, like, again, you might say that it's my anti-Undertale bias kicking in, but I just really don't see any narrative threads to grab onto, and yeah, there's no real solid evidence to point to it. It's kind of Papyrus Knight, but worse, and I was already being generous with Papyrus Knight, so I'm not being generous with Sans. Alright, someone unfamiliar. So, we're getting close to the end. I was kind of hoping to save this reveal till I had gone through all the candidates, but I feel like it's becoming obvious here. I am a filthy, disgusting knight centrist, and I know that's a very cowardly approach to take, but essentially what that means is I don't know who the knight is. I think it's impossible to tell right now. As stated, I don't feel like any candidate has sufficient motivation to want to cause the roaring. So hearing that, you might think that someone unfamiliar is the perfect candidate to me, and I'm going to be talking only opinions here because someone unfamiliar is so vague that there's no real way to have evidence for them, so this is just going to be all opinions. But anyways, you might be surprised to find out that actually I think someone unfamiliar is really low. I think that any one of these people up here could be the knight. They just need to get sufficient motivation, especially up here. If they could get sufficient motivation, they would be bumped straight up to S. But any candidate, as long as good motivation is on the table. So I think someone unfamiliar is actually very unlikely. There's a lot of potential coming out. It's just that we don't have something to match, and I'm very certain that when chapters 3 and 4 come out, we're going to get that motivation. At least I hope so. I don't know, maybe we still won't know who the knight is, and we'll be doomed to another 6 years of debate. Next up we got Suzy, who is going to go down in what again? It's a similar situation to Noel and Birdley and Jockington. Well, not quite Jockington, but Noel and Birdley definitely, as she doesn't really get motivation to be the knight until after the end of Chapter 1, where, again, a Dark Fountain has already been opened. Also, given how generally clueless she seems about Dark Worlds, I find it implausible. She might just have S-tier level acting skills, but given from what we've seen in-game, I have a lot of trouble believing that. And, thematically, she's all about freedom, which I think some people, that might be where any of the few Suzy Knight believers might come from. You could possibly take the knight and make them about freedom, but I really struggle to see any kind of reasoning that would put Suzy in a strong position. Next, we've got Toriel. Toriel's a funny meme candidate, but not much else. She has access to the school, she could possibly get access to the library, but aside from that, she doesn't really seem to have any motivation, and thematically, really strongly doesn't tie in. Asgore gets his place in D tier because I can plausibly see how he could fit into the current story. I cannot, for the life of me, see how Toriel fits into the story, at least from the perspective of being the knight. I don't see what her motivation would be, even going through the most generous interpretations. I think I'm going to have to put her down in the what category. I'll put her above Rudy. No, I'll put her above Miss Boom. I'll put her down here in the middle, just because I think she's better than most of these people here who have outright counter evidence or are just nothing burger supreme. But yeah, narratively, she doesn't have a lot to work with. Undyne. Undyne is another one that's pretty darn low. I might even put her below Toriel here because there's just a whole lot of nothing to work with. Once again, narratively, there's nothing really to sink your teeth into here. Once again, really struggle to see motivation. She really seems happy with her job in the police station. She maybe feels bad about Asgore, but I don't see how that could connect to being the knight. I don't know, maybe she wants to cause a crisis so the mayor has to rehire Asgore or whatever. But even then, that's like super loose. There's not a lot to work with. That's pure speculation on my part, trying to find something to tie in. And in terms of evidence, she's worse off because at least Toriel can plausibly get in the school. Undyne doesn't really have any access to the fountain locations, and her narrative doesn't seem to be pointing in that direction. I can't see that working out. Next up, Icy in Hell. Icy is in Hell. This is a meme theory that also not nearly as popular as Papyrus Knight, but it got way too popular and I want to dunk on it here. It's a nothing burger's nothing burger. It's a double nothing burger. It's got so much nothing in this burger, there's not even a burger anymore. There's not even a burger restaurant. It took the whole thing out like a black hole, like antimatter. It destroyed it. This is reserved exclusively for either the meme lords or the most absolute crackpot of all crackpots. Again, I know I said I was going to keep my bias out of this, but I do feel like pretty objectively there's just nothing to go off of here. It's not even actually really a character. It's a mascot for a pizza place. So, like, that's like saying Waldo from the Where's Waldo franchise of books was the murderer in the real world. Like, he's not a real guy. There's nothing to work with here. And to pin it all off with something else going in the what category, the Vessel. Kind of disappointing way to end things off. I apologize for that. But, I mean, yeah, it's also not a character. I really don't know. It's so weird. There are 4 candidates. The Eggman, the Everyman, the Vessel, and Icy. They're just such nothing characters. I guess I could be more generous and move Vessel, like, up here above the characters with direct counter evidence. But even then, like, we create them. They're not even really a character. There's no discernible motive for them. There's no means. They're in the weird Gastra void. I don't even know how you would get out. Like, maybe they could, but even if they did, when did that happen? Where? Why? And, like, aside from people thinking that fighting the Vessel we created is hype, there's nothing going for this in terms of narrative. I don't see how this fits into anything currently being set up. Yeah, it's just a big bowl pile of nothing. And here is my Knight Theory tier list. This is, I was really hoping to have it be more spaced out across. I really tried to have it be more equal, but man, a lot of people really went in the what category. I do kind of blame the tier list itself. I don't know what they were thinking putting some of these people in here. I mean, I know Gerson just becomes such a big thing thanks to Jaru's video that it kind of has to be in there. But as for the rest of these guys, like, what are they doing? What is this? Aside from that, I hope that overall I was able to maintain a sense of objectivity. I think it is a little tough. I know that my bias definitely snuck in there at some points, but it is difficult to manage that with so little evidence for any characters, and I know that my bias definitely influenced the placement of a lot of these. I'm not going to pretend like I am the perfectly rational, clear-headed, objective mastermind that can see through all lies and speak only truth. I'm not pretending to be that. You know, at the end of the day, I get that this is going to be largely influenced by bias just because we have so little to work with. But hopefully I brought some interesting perspective and I laid out the basic outline of the evidence as best I could. I know believers in the individual Knight theories are going to say I misrepresented them, I didn't bring up all the facts, and like I kind of talked about with Chris in their evidence, it's really difficult to go through everything. Trust me when I say for a lot of these candidates, not all of them, but for a lot of them, I have seen more. More does exist out there. If you think one of these candidates is interesting and you feel like I underrepresented it, I recommend you go and look into stuff that other people have made about the candidate, because this is not meant to be an in-depth overview of each character. This is just my general thoughts on them. And yeah, if you feel like I did misrepresent a candidate or you felt like I just completely glossed over the most important parts, let me know. Leave a comment. I'm eager to read them. I'll debate you a little bit, although I'm kind of sick of Knight debates at this point. I feel like we all are. And if it turns out I'm wrong when chapters 3 and 4 finally drop, you can come back to this video and laugh at me, and I'll pin a comment with the funniest roast of my Knight takes when I inevitably end up being wrong. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. But all that being said, I guess I kind of left S tier empty here. It feels a little awkward. You know what? Actually, I'm going to bump Des up to S tier. S for Des. The S in Des stands for S tier. Just to fill out the space a little more. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.